So I'm going to talk to you today about how game genre affects localization. So again, I'm talking about how game localization affects game genre affects localization. So when we talk about game genre, well, obviously there are a huge number of genres. So with all these different types of games, how can we say that there's any one difference between one kind of genre and another when it comes to localization? So firstly, just to recap, what do I mean by localization? At the very basic level, we can talk about the App Store description and the keywords. So, you know, if you're a sports game, or a puzzle game, just putting that into the App Store description allows people to find your game just by searching on a favorite topic. And you should always use the keywords that people actually search using Keywords Planner from Google. The next level would be partial localization, which means the text of your game and subtitles, but not maybe more than that. Full localization, that means you would have localized versions of your audio and video. And finally, deep localization, which means changing the game to fit the culture. So just to give you an example of deep localization, so Near Replicant in Japan, it was originally, the lead character was originally a sort of, not really sure whether they're male or female characters searching for a sister. So when they brought that to the US, they decided it would be better to make it a really muscly guy that is searching for his daughter. So not only did the artwork change, but the characters changed, and even the storyline changed. And of course, the monetization method changed. So, you know, localization can range from as simple as the meta text and the App Store description to completely changing the game for each market. So the way I look at it is you can take genre as a continuum. So from the very most ultra casual game, which everybody knows, Flappy Birds, or any other casual game, then we can move into mid-core games that people are quite serious about, but they don't really care so deeply about. And finally, to the hardcore games, which, you know, people are very passionate about. So all other genres fit somewhere around these. So the way I look at it is there are 4 key factors. So with casual, the context is not so important, and as you move towards mid-core and hardcore, context becomes more important. What do I mean by context? I mean, if you opened up the text without anything knowing the game, would you understand what's going on? So with a casual game, it'll be about animals and pigs and birds and so on, and you can understand what's going on. But if you go to a hardcore game and you open it up and you're seeing dialogue between the leading characters and you don't, what's going on, who is this, what are they doing? Low word count, casual games may have no words, but as you get to more complex games, you can have higher and higher words. And casual game, a simple story. You can understand what's going on within 5 minutes. But if you talk about a hardcore game, like the Infinity Blade, it's a trilogy. So you need to understand the whole world before you can understand the game. And finally, you know, casual, you have very little in the way of audio-visual localization, and moving through to hardcore where everything has to be localized. So just a quick word on the localization and return on investment. So Apps Annie came out with a statistic recently that 8 to 15% of users are lost to poor localization. And what the statistics showed was in emerging markets like China and Vietnam, this would be 15%. The 8% was for maybe France and Germany. So that doesn't sound like a lot of users, 15%. I mean, are there bigger things to worry about? But when it comes to genre, what happens is people don't really worry about poor quality translation for a casual game, but they really do worry about it when it comes to a mid-core or a hardcore game. So you could lose 50% or you could lose 100% of your users very quickly with the poor localization. So that 8 to 15% doesn't really mean much. It basically means it's not important for casual, it's very important for hardcore. So looking again, with casual, you may not need any localization at all. English can work just fine. The cost is negligible if you want to put some keywords and descriptions into the app stores. And if you do want to localize, you probably have not internationalized. You've probably not designed the game to go into foreign languages. So it may actually be quite difficult. And translation technology, which I'll come back to, is not important. If you go on to mid-core, then it starts to get expensive. Localization becomes a strategic choice. What markets do I go into? Do I localize completely? Do I change my artwork or not? So it becomes more expensive. The weapons, the spells, all that kind of thing, it's not so trivial to localize. And you have to, think about testing and different devices and different markets. Are we going to test on low-end Android phones in Vietnam or only on the iPhone or whatever? So some genres will have more issues than others. But when you come to hardcore and IP games, you must prepare in advance or you will have a disaster. So there will be a gaming community. So they will, if they've never played the game in the foreign language, they will have played it in English. So they'll know how they want this to be translated. And if it's an IP game, say Harry Potter or something like that, they'll know how these characters are supposed to act and look using your local language. So what I suggest is you use pro translators for style. And you can use the gaming community for terminology. And you must use technology for consistency in QA. That is, you're doing part 3 of a trilogy, you have to be using the same words as you were using in part 1. So moving on, one of the key issues is context. So this is what translators see when they're translating. They see like the names of the items and they just see lots of words, base, sleek silver, base again, banana blitz, envy. They don't know what it means. So the typical issues would be you have a weapon or a spell name and you don't know what it means. You have dialogue that depends on previous lines. So if you're talking about a complex game, you have to know the history. Is this person high class? Are they low class? Are they male? Are they female? How do they normally talk? Like Yoda talks back to front. You can have literal translation, word for word. It comes out ridiculous. You can have homograph, which is the same word which has 2 different meanings. And you don't know, is it masculine, feminine, or plural? So our clients actually come up with some solutions for us. So they say more play testing. Play the game again and again, and you will know what these weapons and spells do. You'll know how these characters work. The problem is it's not scalable. So by scalable, I mean, what if the person who's been playing the game leaves and you get a new person? Does he have to play again? What happens if you're going into 10 languages? Are they all going to be playing the game so they can understand the context issues? And it's not repeatable. So again, part 1 of a part 3 trilogy, or you're doing a live operation, and in the live operation, you need the same translator that did the play testing last time, but he's not around anymore. So the other thing they say is we need better translators. We want a translator who's professional and a gamer, always available, reliable, cheap, culturally aware, and experienced in game localization. So we say these translators are unicorns. There's not very many of them. So what we say is that as you move towards more complex games, the chances you can solve your problems by play testing unicorns approach 0. So this is what I mean by play testing unicorns is in terms of outsourcing. So what we actually see is that when many gaming companies, they can't solve these problems of context, they actually build their own in-house team of play testing unicorns, people who are translators, who are bilingual, they know the game, and so on. So what can you do instead? Well, playtesting is important, and good translators are important, but there are other things you can consider. Termbase, style guides, game bible, inventory lists, screenshots, concept art, references, all kinds of processes and technology. So let me just give you some example of these. Termbase. So Termbase is it's kind of like a glossary, but it isn't. So you see on screen here we've got a character from an MMO, and it tells you in all the different languages what he should be called, but also it describes him and may describe the background, it's a noun, and so on. So Termbase is not just a 2-column Excel document. So if you can put in descriptions, what does this spell do? What does this weapon do? And this is where you involve the gaming community, because instead of like throwing out a game and saying, what do you think about this? Or just throwing lots of text at them, if you pull out all the weapons, spells, characters, and so on, and give them, have a look at this, is this your idea of what's correct? And then you can put it into a cloud-based tool and have everybody comment and say, yes, this is the correct name of the weapon. Integrating with artwork for best results. Supposing the game is not complete, well then you can use conceptual artwork. And if you haven't got conceptual artwork, get a description from the gamer. And if the game isn't Chinese, get from the Chinese game studio and translate it. So what we find is for every hour you spend in getting a good Termbase, this will save you a lot of time further down the line. Okay, another thing you can have is a character Bible and a style guide. So what a character Bible is it describes who are all the characters and what they do and what's their background. Are they high class? Are they low class? What's their characteristics? And again, yes, if you play the game for a long amount of time, you'll understand all these points. But again, translators come and they go, and you need to bring new translators on. So in a casual game, this doesn't matter. In a mid-core game, it matters a lot. And in a hardcore game, you have to use this kind of approach. And a style guide, supposing it's a game for kids, you may have to give examples of the kind of language you're using that's suited to kids or not. So this will provide consistency between translators when you got to bring a new translator, and a consistency between updates. So this is one of the things we really encourage now, which is gameplay videos. So instead of telling 10 translators and 10 editors across many languages, go and play the game to understand. Well, they do need to play the game. Let's be clear. Translators need to play the game. But if it's a complex game, you can actually make a video in English with notations, and this gameplay video will save everybody from having to play the game to understand. Okay, so next issue is word count. So games can have between 4,000, say for Dragon Cubes, to some complex MMOs over 1 million words. So it's not just about the game number of words. A big issue here is concatenation. So let me explain about concatenation. This is a typical construct in games. 0, something is in the 1. David's song is in the house. Now this kind of construct saves a lot of time in your number of words, but there's a problem. It works in Chinese. It works probably in Vietnamese, as far as I can recall. It works mainly okay in English, but if you think about, say, French, you've got le and la. So that has 2 different versions, and you've got plurals. So the more you go into European languages, this construct won't work. So many MMOs will actually put out the words like this. So instead of something is in a something, the warrior is in the tent, the queen is in the tent, the warrior is in the castle, and so on. Okay, great, problem solved. But now you've got a new problem, which is you've got huge numbers of words. So as you go through the more complex genres, you have not only more words, but you also have more of these repeating strings again and again. So this is where translation technology comes in. Translation technology allows you to repeat and reuse the content using what's called a translation memory, which records and makes an XML database on the fly of your source and your target. So this allows you to switch translators and keep reusing previous translations. So you only have to change the words, translate the words that have changed. So a flat rate, like per word, makes sense for a casual game, but for a complex game, no, you will need to have a pricing matrix where you're discounting all these repeating strings. Also, this translation technology will allow you to be consistent between translators and consistent between reusing dialogue that's previously reused. Okay, so next final point is the storyline becoming more complex as you move through genres. So game user interface is like software user interface translation. So you have to have translators that understand what variables are, and they can know typical words for buttons and so on. But if your game is based on a story, it's more like a literary translator. So you actually need different kinds of translators for the different parts of your game. Okay, moving on. Okay, again, subtitles versus voiceover. Subtitles are cheaper, but if you go through a more complex game, voiceover is much more immersive. And at the very least, trailers and cutscenes. We've seen the importance of video ads and trailers for bringing in, for monetizing, for bringing people into your game. So even if the whole game is not voiced over, having the trailers and the cutscenes voiced over. So, and graphics, again, as you move to more complex games, more cultural needs, you will spend more time and money in changing the graphics. Testing, I'm going to run through this very quickly. There's many kinds of testing, from compliance to your in-app purchases to your multiplayer. But if you find that you're testing for linguistic reasons, in other words, you're catching the language issues during your testing, this means you probably should be doing more upfront and less at the end. So, come on. So, what are your options for localization? You can use in-house people, and what often happens is people try to outsource. They have these terrible problems and they bring it in, do it in-house, and they do it in-house because they haven't thought out a proper structure for doing localization. You can use freelance people, but the problem is, how do you control them, and do they have Termbases? You can use companies like OneSky, Gengo, 1 Hour Translation, upload the files to their API, but there will be no Termbase, there will be no translation memory, they won't be reusing anything that you're doing. So people typically, in gaming developing company, often use these services and then they complain that the translations don't make any sense. So you can use single language vendors, multi-language vendors. At the high end, there's companies like Synthesis, which will provide you star talent in every country. So as you might imagine, it becomes more and more expensive as you go through. My company is somewhere between an MLV and a Synthesis. So we have our own recording studios in Bangkok where we do every language, but we don't have star talent. So we only do AA games when it comes to Thai. So there's a whole continuum. But basically, when you can't handle it, and we see many people outsourcing it, taking it back in-house, outsourcing it again. So in conclusion, as you move towards games that have higher word counts, with a more complex story, and with audio and video that needs localization, and that are deeply embedded in one culture, and with concatenations and other complexities, the approach you need to localization will change dramatically. So, game over.